All right. Hi, everyone who's coming into the webinar. So we're just going to give a minute or two for people to continue signing in because it's just 1 o'clock. So we'll just give everyone a few minutes. All right. We will get started here. So it looks like the number of attendees has kind of leveled off. So welcome everyone to the Careers in Atmospheric Science Part 1 webinar on government labs and research centers. So this is going to be the first in a series of 3 webinars about different careers that atmospheric scientists can have. So again, today is about government labs and research centers in the US. We're also going to plan to have a webinar on careers in the private sector and careers in academia as well in the next few months. So please just be on the lookout in your emails and on Twitter and social media about upcoming webinars. And so this webinar is presented by the AGU Atmospheric Science Section Early Career Committee. Our email is on this slide here if you ever want to reach out. So my name is Alyssa Stansfield, and I'm a postdoc at Colorado State University, and I will be moderating today. So let me just stop sharing my screen so we can see our panelists. Awesome. So we have 3 awesome panelists here today that work at various US national labs and research centers. And I am going to let them introduce themselves, and they can tell you a little bit about themselves and where they work and what they do. So let's start with Brian.
I'm Brian McDonald. I'm a research scientist at the NOAA Chemical Sciences Laboratory in Boulder, Colorado. I guess I'm on the upper end of early career. So I started at the NOAA Chemical Sciences Lab in 2014. I got to here through a series postdoctoral visiting fellowship. At the time, I thought I was visiting, but it turns out I've decided to stay here relatively longer term. My research areas are on air quality, emissions to the atmosphere, uh, greenhouse gases as well. And um, and I think um, when I started out in 2014, I mainly was responsible for doing scientific research and publishing papers, but now I've started transitioning more into a management role. And now I'm actually the group leader for a 17-member modeling team at the Chemical Sciences Lab. So I can also talk a bit about how career promotion and things change over time within a government lab. But that kind of gives my background for now.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. Let's go to Liz.
Hey folks, I'm Liz Wiggins. I'm a research scientist at NASA Langley. That's in Hampton, Virginia, not Langley, Virginia, just to be a little bit more confusing. I primarily study wildland fire emissions and behavior and air quality, and I do a little modeling, a little remote sensing, a little lab work, a little field work, a little bit of everything. I did a postdoc at NASA Langley starting in 2018, and I recently transitioned to being a civil servant just last year. So I'm on the other end of the spectrum from Brian. Yeah, so thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Nick.
Hey, I'm Nick Davis. I'm a scientist at NCAR in the Atmospheric Chemistry Observations and Modeling Lab. I came here in 2019 after a postdoc at CSL. So I am one of the lead developers for CSM's high top model WACCM, the whole atmospheric community climate model. So sort of tune the model, come up with new capabilities, and do some fundamental and applied research. Yeah, I guess I in this group could comment on some of the balance between like community facing model stuff and then fundamental research on the atmosphere.
Great, thank you so much for all our panelists for being here. So before I dive into the questions, I just want to mention that I forget if I said anyone in the audience, if you guys have questions for all of the panelists, or if you want to direct a question at a specific panelist, please just put your question in the questions tab, which should be in your little GoToWebinar control panel. And we have some organizers here who will help me filter through the questions, and we'll ask some of them to the panelists. Great, so we're going to start off with a couple of prepared questions that we have. And some of you did touch on this a little bit in your intros, but can you just talk about a little bit about how you got your current position? Like, did you start off as a postdoc at that place, or did you work there as a student in some capacity? Kind of how did you get your current position? And also, what is the promotion potential for your position? And I'll just open it to whoever wants to answer first.
I'm happy to get us started. So yeah, I was a postdoc 2018. And after about 2 years of working there, I realized I really enjoyed the environment. I liked the group I was working with, and I really wanted to stay. So I began talking to my advisor and letting him know that I was interested in staying. And he and a couple other kind of leadership people, management people at Langley found a way to bring me on as a 4-year term. So that's really typically in NASA, especially the way that you get brought on is you get brought on kind of as a temporary thing at first, but you can either be brought on as a civil servant or a contractor, and it all comes out in the wash. There's little nuances to each of those benefits and pros and cons. But after I got the 4-year appointment, they opened up a civil servant position that I just happened to be in the right place at the right time for. And, just to be honest with the people that are on here, I think in order to really stay on at a national lab, going from a postdoc, you need to be good at what you do, obviously, but you also have to be in the right place at the right time. So some of it is a little bit of timing. And promotion potential. Yeah, it's there's definitely promotion potential in my current position. You go up for, I'm not sure if it's the same at the other national labs, but we're all on a GS scale. So every year you get a step increase kind of automatically. And then you can go to the next GS level every couple of years, but you have to prove that you're able to perform at the next GS level. So definitely promotion potential. It just takes a little bit of time, and you do have to fight for it. That's been my experience, at least.
I can follow up. I'll just say, I mean, Liz is also right about being in the right place at the right time. I think I've been very fortunate in that regard. So I'll just say, I mean, I started out, I think I was at an AGU in December and just talking, networking, and the scientist at the time, Greg Frost, encouraged me to submit to a series visiting postdoctoral fellowship, which I think was due the next week. And so I rapidly wrote that series visiting postdoc fellowship. I fortunately got it. I, ended up deciding to come to Colorado. So previously I had done my PhD at UC Berkeley. I know actually it was challenging because at the time my now wife, right, was also looking for jobs. So it's always a challenge to find, two positions in one place. Fortunately, eventually she did find her own job in a different area than mine in Colorado, and that I think helped make the case, more easy to kind of live and stay in Colorado and continue on the career track. But I know that's always a challenge for many folks, is figuring out how to find good jobs and careers for yourself and your partner. I also was fortunate to join a group where when I started, it was a little top heavy in the sense that it had more senior research scientists in the group and relatively few kind of early career postdocs. And I think I've benefited from being able to be pushed up to have more responsibilities earlier on than normal. But on the other hand, I think, just say, I mean, I was a series or University of Colorado employee for maybe the first 5 years of that. I only actually became a civil servant right at the beginning of the pandemic, and then just within the last couple of months taking on more of a administrative or group leader role. So every agency is different with respect to how they handle promotion and career track. NOAA Chemical Sciences Laboratory, for example, we work very closely with the University of Colorado to making sure that there is, whether you're on the civil servant side or on the university side, that there is kind of a defined career track. Every year there's a annual summary that kind of keep track of what you've accomplished in the last year and things that you're planning to do in the future. And I think my only piece of advice is make sure that wherever you go, or wherever you decide, that you have good people advising and mentoring you on how to keep moving to the next stage with respect to promotion. So I'll leave it there.
I had a very circuitous route to my position. So at NCAR, at least at the ladder track level, usually you're hired for a very specific purpose. It's not project based, and I do stratospheric dynamics work now, but I did not for my graduate work, and so I think it is definitely important to, one thing with scarce opportunities, like everyone has said so far, there's a lot of right timing, but I think actually you can maybe bend that a bit, because probably one of the most important things I did consciously in grad school and my postdoc was to do this thing called talent stacking. So it's the idea that you can combine some skills that individually you might face stiff competition if you want to be the best at, but combined they actually make you very unique, and by that sort of actually very marketable across different areas of science. So like for me, my topic in grad school was Hadley cell expansion, but I really specialized in like developing metrics for circulation features, but also modifying model source code to do hypothesis testing. And I remember being a grad student and seeing all these papers about theories for Hadley cell expansion and thinking, okay, I could try to come up with the best theory like 100 other people and imagine I'm going to do better than that. Or I could like develop a modeling approach to try to address that and cut through it all. And I did not get fellowships for postdocs. I actually applied to a ton and got none, and really had to do some soul searching and took a postdoc in strat dynamics and stratospheric ozone modeling. But because I had sort of cultivated that sort of stack of different skills, I really was able to quickly get results out of the postdoc and then argue when I went up to try to get this position at NCAR. Basically came and said, here's how we can accelerate the impact of our whole atmosphere modeling and re-engineer models to like give better answers. And I think, yeah, from my perspective, it was really, I think if I had not consciously tried to really become interdisciplinary in my approach to science when I was a grad student and a postdoc, I definitely would not have this position, because it was a different field. Like I did not know the research group basically. And I think that's also like an important thing I used to try to get this position, was to approach science like a business. Like, what is my product and how do I get people to buy it? And, I imagined a Venn diagram of like, here's what NCAR and AECOM need, and here's what I could bring. And like, I think it's rare that anyone's a perfect fit for a job at a lab, but I think people get really excited when you come from a different background and show them, you don't just want to meet in the middle, but really want to expand what they can do. And so I would say, in addition to really trying to put yourself in positions to be near lab environments so that when opportunities come up, you can take them, you also really work on how you can market yourself and develop your skills so that people even outside of your current area of research might actually benefit from hiring you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Those are great answers. So I think as students, a lot of times we don't get to interact too much with people who work at government labs, maybe just at conferences and stuff. So can you guys maybe talk about what your everyday, day-to-day work experience is like? Kind of what do you spend your time doing? Are you out in the field? Are you writing papers, writing grant proposals, stuff like that? Maybe Liz, I know you mentioned you do all kinds of different stuff, so maybe you can start.
Yeah, so I think you explained it pretty well. A day in the life is very different depending on what time of the year, what day of the week. Yeah, it's really, really variable. I do some of the same or similar kind of work that I did in grad school. I spent a lot of time in MATLAB in grad school in Python, and I find myself still in MATLAB and Python. So some of those skills definitely transferred over. I think one of the things that really changed from being a grad student to being at a government lab and being a research scientist was the diversity and what you're responsible for. So we do sometimes have field campaigns that can last, 4, 6, 8 weeks where you're out in the field. A lot of times there's lab work building up to these field campaigns and after the field campaigns. And then there's the data analysis. We do have to submit proposals, or I have to submit proposals. So whenever there's a deadline coming, that's what I'm going to be spending all my time on. And I think for most labs and even the academic setting, it's publish or perish, right? So you want to publish as much as you can of your, of your good research. Let's see, did I cover everything? Yeah. So it's a hybrid.
Whatever,
I think
whatever your day-to-day work is like, yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
it's a hybrid. It just depends on what's going on.
Yeah, cool. Nick and Brian, do you guys have anything to add?
Well, it can. So I think, like I said, well, my role has changed a lot. I think since I've started at the NOAA Chemical Sciences Lab. So, in the first few years, transitioning from grad school to postdoc to research scientist, again, very much about publishing articles and really doing that scientific analysis, hypothesis-driven science myself. I think once I was able to get a publication record, right, also based on the work that I did in my postdoc, I was given more opportunities to not necessarily do the science myself, but to start mentoring, starting with undergraduates, but then they became graduate students to postdocs. And so learning how to still do science, but through a mentoring and advising role. And then now, being a group leader, I don't even necessarily, there's more to it than just mentoring and advising students, postdocs, and graduate students. I also have senior scientists in my group that I manage, and it's also making the case. It's seen, I think, Nick, you were saying, think about science as a business. Well, there is also a business side to science in the sense that a lot of these federal agencies get their money through the congressional appropriation process, right? So there's aspects of now seeing, not just thinking about the science of today, but really thinking about where is our group or research portfolio across this whole team going to be in 5 years, because you always have to be thinking ahead too. But I'll also say, people have different things that they want to do, right? Some people want to keep doing the science and take on less of an administrator or managing role, and that's also possible too. So I think it depends on what you want. There's definitely different tracks you can go down. But most important for a government lab at first, right, is publishing. That's really critical, and establishing your scientific reputation first. And that does then open doors to the other pathways you might go down as well.
Yeah, it's similar at NCAR. It's obviously a high priority on papers, because that's how your ideas get disseminated. I think like my day-to-day is like live or die by a to-do list of priorities, and like functionally I actually have, like, the first thing I do is I have a one to-do list item like right at the top, and when I start work, I immediately do that. I don't even look at emails, because I get a lot of emails. It's like, there's model development, someone in the community may need help with debugging something, or someone needs a presentation slide. And so I typically every day or every other day have like the email load, and that's different than grad school too, where you go to class and you do your research. Like, so it's a much more connected world where people need stuff from you that's not going to necessarily give you a paper or something, but it's an important part of your job. And I feel like I try to make like a big focus each day, like it could be writing or revising a paper, or setting up some model runs and really ensuring that everything's kosher there. And so, yeah, I think it's exactly what Liz and Brian have said, which is, you have a very much more complicated layering of projects and initiatives and service that really needs to flow. And it's kind of like, you can't ever just sort of let one go by the wayside. So it's much more of a, like making sure projects and things keep getting the attention they need to get progress is, I would say, like really important for my job. And I think, I think if you're organized, you can do this kind of job in like a normal 9 to 5 kind of environment if you're organized and you really focus. I sometimes, when we have big development pushes or something, will work weekends or evenings to try to get stuff done. But yeah, I think if you're organized, the work-life balance is actually pretty good. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So it sounds like kind of at all your organizations, time management and organization is important because you all do very different things every day, kind of variety. So I think, so we do have a question from the audience, and I'm going to loop it, kind of relate it to one of our other prepared questions. So if, we probably have a lot of students and postdocs on this webinar. And so do you guys have any advice for current grad students or postdocs who are interested in working at your organization in the future? And then would you say a postdoc is required to get a job at your organization? And let's say, Nick, you can go first since you've been going last.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Dang. Now I don't get to see what other people say. Okay. Yeah, I will just go back and say, I think one way to multiply and compound your opportunities is to really stack a lot of different unique capabilities. And every time you do a new science paper, try something new, really branch out. You'll feel your community and your opportunities multiply. And I think that gives you a lot more leverage to getting these rare jobs. I'd also say, like, this is a point in your career when you're a grad student, a postdoc, where you actually take huge risks. And I'll go out on a limb and say, you've all heard science is an exchange of knowledge. I think that's wrong. I think it's actually an exchange of attention for risk. And it's got basically no downside, which pretty much is the only time in your life where you take big risks in a profession, you have no downside. So as long as you're diligent about your work and you do it well. So what I mean by that is, like, you take a risk when you push an idea hard or a hypothesis to an extreme, or how strongly you're willing to risk being wrong with research. I think you all probably get a feel for when you can play it really safe and when you can really reach. And I think the thing is, when you really try to push science in your area of research in grad school or postdoc into territory that gets the conversation going, gets your work a lot of attention, even when people grill you and really give you a hard time, it's a compliment because it actually means they're taking you very, very seriously. And so I think one of the most important pieces of advice I could give you if you want to get one of these jobs is really try to imagine how hard you could push your science and the risks you can take, because the chance that it doesn't pay off, I think, is pretty low. People in science really appreciate that kind of stuff. We all know, even if you're wrong, a theory survived, a greater onslaught or something. And so I would say, at this time when you don't have a lot of extra responsibilities and all you do have is, basically your scientific work, just go absolutely hard on it and push it as hard as you can. And I think you'll find your community will pay attention.
So as far as pathways, right, to getting positioned at a government lab, there's a variety of ways. It doesn't just start with having a postdoc previously. There's a variety of postdoctoral fellowships. There are some graduate student fellowships. There's undergraduate student fellowships. So if you have if you think you want to work in a government lab, there's often other type of internship style programs that you might be able to take advantage of. Sometimes university professors will be like, can I send a graduate student to work with your group for a temporary period? And so sometimes that can work out as well. Sometimes we take people who've had a postdoc or two. So I think my point is that there's a variety, and I should also say sometimes high school students want to do projects, right? So there's a variety of experience levels, right? Where you can potentially work with a government lab if that's what you're interested. Um, and it doesn't hurt to just reach out to somebody and just see if there are any opportunities as well.
I would say, just speaking specifically for NASA, you don't have to have a postdoc here to get a job. All of the jobs are listed on USA Jobs and they're publicly available and open. So as long as you're qualified, then you have a chance of getting in. I think it does help to have a postdoc because then you kind of know when these opportunities are coming up. And having a postdoc does not guarantee that you're going to get a permanent position. So it's kind of a big tangled mess. But yeah, kind of just going back to what Nick was saying, just be as diverse and open as you can. Do the best science that you can. Push the limits. And if you're that kind of person, then you're going to get the attention of a national lab as long as you're doing good work that's really like state of the art. So that's like the best non-answer I can give you. It helps to have a postdoc. It doesn't help to have a postdoc. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to use another one of the questions from the audience. So someone asked, what challenges do international people face in getting a position at national labs? So I guess more generally is, can international people who are not US citizens get a position at your institution? And maybe if not, is there any way that international people can like work at least with you guys on research or something like that? Yeah, so I'm sure, I think this is probably different depending on the or the lab or the institute. So Brian, why don't you go first? You haven't gone first yet.
I think the short answer is yes. I mean, half of my group are international scientists, so it's possible. It's usually not done. I mean, to be a civil servant, I believe, you do need to be a U.S. citizen. But this is why we also work with the University of Colorado as well, to be able to hire international scientists if it's warranted. So it's definitely possible, just not necessarily through the civil servant track.
I can comment on NCAR. So it's not technically a government lab, so there's no government employees. It's an FFRDC, so it's base funded by NSF, but it's kind of arm's length. Yeah, we have a lot of international folks. I think it's like any other line of work where you need, a visa and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't see in our institute a whole lot of friction to someone from out of the country coming here. I mean, like our lab just hired someone from another country to be lab director like a year and a half ago. I mean, the reality is the labs do look to the international community to get talent. So yeah, I don't see any reason that presents an issue really.
I'm not entirely sure what I can say here. It's possible to become a research scientist or a postdoc at NASA if you're international, but it's difficult. And there are some barriers, unfortunately, that internally we're trying to fight against. But to be honest, it's a little difficult. It's possible, but difficult.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. That's good information to know. So another question from our audience was, how common are remote positions in government or research centers, and is this changing? So I guess I think they're talking about fully remote positions, but maybe you can also comment on like if you're able to work from home sometimes or not as well. So whoever wants to start this one off, go ahead.
I'll start off since I ended on a not so happy note. I actually live about an hour and a half from the center and only go in once every week or two. Unless there's a field campaign coming up, then I'll be down there all the time. But I think it is absolutely possible to work remotely. Kind of just depends on what you do though, right? Like if you're more of a lab work person, then it's gonna be kind of hard for you to work remotely. But if you're, a data analysis or remote sensing modeling type person, I think it's possible. And even now, I would say the majority of our workforce is still remote, at least 50% of the time, if not more. So yeah, I think that the community mindset towards that is definitely changing, especially after the pandemic, and especially at NASA. They're very open to it, and they have like hoteling spaces. So if you do go into work, you have a nice place that you can sit, even if you don't have a permanent office. But I think that the kind of community idea towards that is definitely changing towards remote work being cool.
I think it's very lab or agency dependent. I think NOAA wasn't as flexible about remote work. Technically, I'm supposed to come in 3 days a week, but I also have an infant child who goes to daycare on the campus, so if I don't bring him in, then I don't get work done at home either. But it is a challenge, I think. Some institutions, some labs are more flexible on remote work, and others less so. And I'd say, at least for our lab, or full remote is probably very difficult to get. But I also know of other labs within within NOAA, which are also very much more open to the idea. So it's kind of, at the end of the day, it's kind of dependent on, the manager, whoever is managing you at the lab, and higher up in the agency as well.
Yeah, I think at NCAR it probably depends. If you're someone who is gonna be more into like managing research or people or hosting visitors, especially because we have a strong visitor program. And yeah, we work from home 2-3 days a week, but for sure, like for those kind of positions, NCAR obviously wants you to be within driving distance or commute distance of NCAR. But I think a lot of folks are doing remote when the job is very research focused or data science focused, or we have a software engineer who works quite remotely. So yeah, it just depends, and they have a lot of new initiatives and support coming online to sort of facilitate that. I think there's something maybe about funds to get people to come out and do lab visits once or twice a year. So I don't know if it was out of pocket before when folks were remote and wanted to come in, but now I think there's like a system to support that. So certainly it's moving that direction. It just really depends on your position. I don't know so much the lab. There's not as much variance in labs maybe at NCAR. I think it really just depends, like what's your actual job category, whether you would satisfy it or not if you were remote.
Great. So yeah, sounds like those jobs remote jobs are out there, but it does depend a little bit on the lab and the manager you have in certain situations. But sounds like they're available in some circumstances. Okay, let's move on. I think we're out of questions from the audience, so I'm going to do one of the other ones I sent to you guys. And I think this one always comes up when we're talking to people who work for government jobs. Is does anything about your job change with federal administration changes? I'll go, Liz. Do you want to answer this one first?
Not really, but I can. Yes, it does change. The keywords that you use will change, but I think the core research that you're doing stays the same. And government shutdowns are very, very not fun. We're not even allowed to check our email, which can be really, really hard to get any work done. So, yes.
Yeah, I think I agree with this. Well, I'll say from the core research perspective, I don't think necessarily the type of work I have done changed. Now being more on the management side of things, I do think, yeah, it does. It'll change in terms of what the priorities are and kind of where level of funding goes for different priorities. That does kind of change. I mean, that can change not even within the same administration, right? If you get a new administrator for your agency as well, those things can change even if the White House or Congress stays the same. So I think the key is just, one piece of advice my PhD advisor gave me before I left is just being flexible in your research, right? To be able to adapt, because the priorities and the questions also evolve over time, and being able to adapt to that.
Yeah, again, like, because NCAR is at arm's length, it's pretty independent, so functionally no. Although, yeah, there's an NSF appropriation, but that's been flat for a very long time. So it's in practice for what we care about, which is the funding from the government. I mean, nothing much changes from that regard. I think when you're a grad student, even postdoc, like, it's easy to feel the weight of some of this stuff, because you sort of see it as like people in power or something threatening your career, basically. I mean, I remember what people were like, yeah, a while back, but I think, it's kind of like there are people at labs who really go take the arrows for you, in terms of, like, as you go along, you realize how much the people in higher positions at labs really work hard to defend what you do. And so I think one thing that's important at this point in your career is, really keep your eye on the ball, focus, and try not to let all of the noise just distract you from your good work, because the people who matter are the people who are already going to be fighting for your work at the lab. And I think when you remember that type of stuff, there are practical considerations, but rest assured, like, there's a very robust system, even with all the news you sometimes hear about stuff. Like, there's a very robust system, and to be fair, a lot of people in Congress do truly appreciate what scientists do. Like, they understand when at the end of the day. I think that's important to remember too.
Great, thank you for those answers. Okay, we'll move on to maybe a little more fun question. So I want to know, for each of you, what is your favorite part of your job? And then what is something you maybe don't like as much about your job? Let's throw it to Brian first.
I mean, the fun part of the job, I think, is getting to play with a lot of toys or modeling tools, right? And really throw kind of, intellectual thought and, working with team. I mean, I think the one thing I really like about working at Government Lab is you get to work in big teams with one another to address, for example, field campaigns, as Liz mentioned, is a can be a very fun thing to work together on common research questions with 50 to 100 people. So that's fun in my mind. And then for me, I really enjoy mentoring, advising students and postdocs and research scientists in my group. Yeah, my least favorite part is dealing with budgets, but that as Nick said, hope you know as an early career, you should be probably shielded from that, right? That's for kind of the mid-career and lab directors to help continue to make those cases for the research. So yeah, I'd say that part is less fun. But then I'll say the part of that can be fun is thinking about, having an ability to have input on that budget process on where you might think the priorities are now and 5 or 10 years in the future. So having an ability to have input and say on that is also actually can be rewarding as well.
I can go. I have a lot of freedom to choose like strategically important tasks. So I'm like a hard funded position at NCAR, and I feel like maybe I had a similar experience as Brian. Like kind of walked into a situation where there's a lot of retirement and suddenly a lot of responsibility falling on me. So like feel like yeah, I basically have like a supervisor, but I talk to them like once a year or twice a year or something. It's very independent. But I like the prioritization of the model development and science, and that even changes week to week, so it's very fluid, sometimes day to day. And so it doesn't mean I get to do whatever, but I do get a lot of breadth to like say, I think this is important and we need to make this happen. And I feel like that's like very empowering. When someone gives you that kind of responsibility, you also really want to deliver. And so I think to me, that's a big part of the job. It's like NCAR is like, okay, here's, make the right choices and make sure you satisfy the like needs of the science. And that's actually like really important to me because it gives me like a lot of wind in my sails to like want to show up every day and do my best. I also really like to help the community. You can ask anyone that has asked me about, hey, I want to do this with the model, I have this idea for experiment, or oh, I want this new output field. Like I'm very liberal helping people modify the model, and it gives me a lot of happiness because I get to like basically use one of those really specific things I worked on and like multiply it out to other people. And so that like community facing side is really exciting and meaningful to me. My least favorite part of is meetings. Like I have a lot of meetings where I'm often like, this didn't need to be a meeting, or okay, this could have been half an hour. And I think when you're at a national lab and you can get piled on with meetings, so part of it is also knowing how to say no sometimes to stuff, or really strategically defend your schedules, because you have to sometimes say, look, I know what I have to do. Like I can't commit to this, and that can be challenging too.
Yeah, I'll pretty much echo what they just said. I think I have two favorites. I've had, yeah, been struggling trying to pick just one. One of them is definitely the freedom. I think there's just so much freedom to really pursue what you find most interesting, as long as it, kind of aligns with some of your research objectives higher up. Um, I kind of equate NASA, at least Langley, to like a playground for nerds. That's kind of how it feels to me. We're all just really excited about the science that we're doing, and it's a great environment to be in. Um, and then my second favorite would probably be the field work. I'm partially an airborne scientist, so I've flown on the NASA DC-8 aircraft through a pyrocumulonimbus cloud. We've been in a van behind a jet engine getting hit with hurricane force winds and violently shaking while we're collecting measurements. So there's some really fun aspects to field work, as well as the freedom. And then my least favorite part is managing my funding because it bores me to tears, but it's important. So
Great, thank you, everyone. Liz, I think that is a great transition because we probably have time for one more question. And I think something we haven't talked about too much is funding. So can you guys just talk a little bit about the funding for your position? Do you have to find your own funding, or are you kind of given funding from your lab? So Liz, why don't you start because you kind of mentioned that.
yeah, so I imagine it's different for every lab, and it's different even within NASA. For each individual person, it's kind of just depends. I can tell you about my specific situation. Um, I have funding from several different projects, and I'm responsible for working on all of those and putting in, a certain amount of time to all of those. So I'm encouraged to find my own funding, but if for some reason I run out, then there are pretty easy ways that I can draw um, from larger buckets to make up my deficit. But I think for NASA especially, you're encouraged to try and find your own, to submit your own proposals, that sort of thing. But if you get stuck between a rock and a hard place, you're not in huge trouble.
Yeah, I can go next. I'm sort of 100% core funded, so I don't have to get funding for myself, but that's sort of contingent on like very specific role. That's kind of how it works at NCAR. Like when you're a project scientist or an AS, it's soft money, but the projects can, obviously change. But when usually when you're core funded, you got a very specific role that you're going to fill over a pretty long duration of time. But also as you go along in seniority, there's an expectation that you will bring in money to fund other folks, that you will occasionally bring in some sort of supplemental funds for your core funding. So it's kind of like, in one way it's nice because you get a chance to build a research portfolio early without having to seek out funding, but yeah, you never really you never escape it. You still have to. It's just not as pressing for your situation early on, and I think that was really nice as an early career scientist to have that sort of jump start.
Um, yeah, we tend to be more on the core funded side of things in the NOAA Chemical Sciences Lab. Although it does help, I think it does help with, well, so even though I was largely core funded throughout kind of my time here at CSL, I did, at times write PI proposals to various competitive calls. And I think it's a very useful exercise, even if you're core funded, it's still a useful career development to be able to do that, put your ideas out there, and also get feedback. And if you get a grant, great, right? You can be excited about that. But even if you don't, it's still an important learning process. I think now even though for postdocs or early career research scientists in my group, I encourage them to, at times, right? It's not 100%. I mean, it's not a major part of their job to just seek funding and bring in grants, right? But there may be a call here or there that's worth trying, right? Where you might be competitive for it, and it's good to put your thoughts down on paper. And I usually tell them, it's like, and if you don't get that court funded through that solicitation process, then we'll fund it, right? To get that work going. So if you have a chance to even in a core funded position to write grants, it's useful to do that. Also partially because if you ever wanted to go from a government lab to the university setting or academic setting, they're always going to be asking you, have you written grants before? So I think it helps you hone your kind of scientific thinking skills, but also it helps you keep your doors open for whatever reason happens down the road, right? And then I'd just say, for any lab, it's probably not going to be completely core funded, right? So there's an expectation as you go higher up, right, that your ability to communicate science, to communicate to the folks who do control budgets, why should this program get money, or what are your priorities? So it's important to build those skills on how to communicate science and why, as you get higher up, you're always having to defend, why does your program exist and why should we keep funding you or give you more money, right? That happens as you get farther up. But I think, the way to start learning that is just, if you have chances, applying for competitive calls gives you some insights into the type of things you need to convey, right, for program managers.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, kind of sounds like it again depends on position, but applying for grants is never a bad idea, and it's good to get the experience because you may need to get funding for other people if you move into a more managerial or higher role. Awesome. So we're just about out of time. So I just want to really thank Nick, Liz, and Brian for being here. I'm sure all the attendees really appreciate you answering their questions. I think all these answers were super insightful and helpful. So thank you for taking this hour out of your, I'm sure, busy day to do this for us. And so I'll just lastly mention that for the attendees, we put a Google form in the chat. So it's only 3 questions, it's super quick. If you could just give us your feedback in that form, it would be really helpful for our early career committee. Yeah, so with that, I'm gonna stop the recording.